little bit, I have a nice hot chocolate again. Look at that. Look at that. Looks massive, doesn't it? Looks like a marsh. And it's in a very fancy cup. Right. Welcome back to the Cloud House Cafe again. So, chapter 87, The Great Armada. Hopefully you can hear me properly. Hopefully you can. The Great Armada. The long and narrow peninsula of Malacca, extending southeastward from the territories of Burma, forms the most southerly point of all Asia. In a continuous line from that peninsula stretch the long islands of Sumatra, Java, Bali, and Timor. So incidentally, Burma is spelled with an I and an H, and Bali is spelled B-A-L-L-Y. Anyway, Bali and Timor, which, with many others, form a vast mole or rampart lengthwise connecting Asia with Australia and dividing the long, unbroken Indian Ocean from the thickly studded Oriental archipelagos. This rampart is pierced by several sally ports for the convenience of ships and whales, conspicuous among which are the Straits of Sunda and Malacca. By the Straits of Sunda, chiefly vessels bound China and from the west, emerge into the China Seas. Those narrow straits of Sunda divide Sumatra from Java, and standing midway in that vast rampart of islands, buttressed by that bold green promontory known to seamen as Java Head, they not a little correspond to the central gateway opening into some vast walled empire, and considering the inexhaustible wealth of spices and silks and jewels and gold and ivory with which the 1,000 islands of that oriental sea are enriched, it seems a significant provision of nature that such treasures, by the very formation of the land, should at least bear the appearance, however ineffectual, of being guarded from all the grasping Western world. The shores of the Straits of Sunda are unsupplied with those domineering fortresses which guard the entrances to the Mediterranean, the Baltic, and the Propontis. Unlike the Danes, these Orientals do not demand the obsequious homage of lower-topped sails from the endless procession of ships before the wind, for which centuries past by night and by day have passed between the islands of Sumatra and Java, frighted by the costliest cargoes of the East. But while they freely waive a ceremonial like this, they do by no means renounce their claim to more solid tribute. Time, out of mind of the piratical prose of the Malays, lurking among the low-shaded coves and the islets of Sumatra, have sallied out upon the vessels sailing through the straits, fiercely demanding tribute at the point of their spears. Though by the repeated bloody chastisements they have received at the hands of the European cruisers, the audacity of these corsairs has of late been somewhat repressed. Yet even at the present day we occasionally hear of English and American vessels which in those waters have been remorselessly boarded and pillaged. With a fair fresh wind, the Pequod was now drawing nigh to these straits. Ahab, proposing to pass through them into the Javan Sea, and thence cruising northwards over waters known to be frequented here and there by the sperm whale, sweep inshore of the Philippine Islands and gain the far coast of Japan in time for the great whaling season there. By these means, the circumnavigating Pequod would sweep almost all the known sperm whale cruising lines of the world previous to descending upon the line in the Pacific, where Ahab, though everywhere else foiled in his pursuit, firmly counted upon giving battle to Moby Dick in the sea he was most known to frequent, and at a season which he might not reasonably be presumed to be haunting it. But how now? In this zoned quest does Ahab touch no land? Does his crew drink air? Surely he will stop for water. Nay, for a long time now the circus-running sun has raced within his fiery ring, and needs no sustenance by what's in himself. So, Ahab, mark this too in the whaler. While other hulls are loaded down with alien stuff to be transferred to foreign wharves, the world-wandering whale ship carries no cargo but herself and crew, their weapons and their wants. She has a whole lake's contents bottled in her ample hold. She is ballasted with utilities, not altogether with unusable pig lead and kentlage. She carries years of water in her. Clear old prime Nantucket water, which, when 3 years afloat, the Nantucketer in the Pacific prefers to drink before the brackish fluid, but yesterday rafted off in casks from the Peruvian or Indian streams. Hence it is that while other ships may have gone to China from New York and back again, touching at a score of ports, the whale ship, in all that interval, may not have sighted one grain of soil, having seen no man but floating seamen like themselves. So that you carry on, so then that you carry this, so that did you carry them the news that another flood had come, they would only answer, well, boys, here's the ark. Now, as many sperm whales have been captured off the western coast of Java in the near vicinity of the Straits of Sunda, indeed most of the ground round about was generally recognised by the fishermen as an excellent spot for cruising. Therefore, as the Pequod gained more and more upon the Java head, the lookouts were repeatedly hailed and admonished to keep wide awake. But though the green palmy cliffs of the land soon loomed on the starboard bow, and with delighted nostrils the fresh cinnamon was sniffed in the air, yet not a single jet was descried. Almost renouncing all thought of falling in with any game hereabouts, the ship had well nigh entered the straits when the customary cheering cry was heard from aloft, and ere long a spectacle of singular magnificence saluted us. But here be it premised, that owing to the unwearied activity with which of late there had been hunted over all 4 oceans, the sperm whales, instead of being almost invariably, sailing in small detached companies, as in former times, and now frequently met with in extensive herds, sometimes embracing so great a multitude that it would almost seem as if the numerous nations of them had sworn solemn league and covenant for mutual assistance and protection. To this aggregation of the sperm whale into such immense caravans may be imputed the circumstance that even in the best cruising grounds you may now sometimes sail for weeks and months together without being greeted by a single spout, and then be suddenly saluted by what sometimes seems thousands on thousands. I wonder why. Broad on both bows, at the distance of some 2 or 3 miles, and forming a great semicircle embracing one half of the level horizon, a continuous chain of whale jets were up playing and sparkling in the noonday air. Unlike the straight perpendicular twin jets of the right whale, which, dividing at top, fall over in 2 branches like the cleft drooping boughs of a willow, the single forward slanting spout of the sperm whale, which presents a thick curled bush of white mist, continually rising and falling away to leeward. That's the Grand Armada assumed was ships, but it appears to be whales. Seen from the Pequod's deck, then, as she would rise on a high hill of the sea, this host of vapoury spouts individually curling up into the air and beheld through a blending atmosphere of bluish haze, showed like the 1,000 cheerful chimneys of some dense metropolis, descried of a balmy autumnal morning by some horseman on a height. As marching armies approach an unfriendly defile in the mountains, accelerate their march in earnest to place that perilous passage in their rear, and once more expound in comparative security upon the plain, even did this vast fleet of whales now seem hurrying forward through the straits, gradually contracting the wings of the semicircle and swimming on in one solid but crescentic centre. Crowding all sail the Pequod, pressing after them, the harpooners handling their weapons and loudly cheering from the heads of their yet suspended boats. If the wind only held, little doubt had they that, chased through the Straits of Sunda, the vast host would only deploy into the Oriental seas to witness the capture of not a few of their number. And who could tell whether in that congregated caravan Moby Dick himself might not temporarily be swimming, like the worshipped white elephant in the coronation procession of the Siamese? So with the stun sail piled on stun sail, we sailed along, driving these leviathans before us, when of a sudden the voice of Tashtego was heard, loudly directing attention to something in our wake. Corresponding to the crescent in our van, we beheld another in our rear. It seemed formed of detached white vapours, rising and falling, something like the spouts of the whales. Only they did not so completely come and go, for they constantly hovered without finally disappearing. Levelling his glass at this sight, Ahab quickly resolved in his pivot hole, crying, "Aloft there, and rig whips and buckets to wet the sails! Malays, sir, and after us!" As if long lurking behind the headlands till the Pequod should fairly have entered the straits, these rascally Asiatics were now in hot pursuit to make up for their overcautious delay. And when the swift Pequod with a fresh leading wind was herself in hot chase, how very kind of these tawny philanthropists to assist in speeding her to her own chosen pursuit, mere riding whips and rolls to her that they were. As with glass under arm, Ahab to and fro paced the deck in his forward turn, beholding the monsters he chased, and in the after one the bloodthirsty pirates chasing him. And some such fancy as the above seemed his. And when he glanced upon the green walls of the watery defile in which the ship was then sailing, and bethought him that through that gate lay the route to the Vengeance, and beheld how that through the same gate he was now both chasing and chased to this deadly end, and not only that, but a herd of remorseless wild pirates and inhuman Asiatic devils were infernally cheering him on with their curses. When all these conceits had passed through his brain, Ahab's brow was left gaunt and ribbed, like the black sand beach after some stormy tide had been gnawing it, without being able to drag the firm thing from its place. Dramatic. But thoughts like these troubled very few of the reckless crew. And when, after steadily dropping the pirates astern, the Pequod at last shot by the vivid green cockatoo point to the Sumatra side, engaging at last upon the broad waters beyond, then the harpooners seemed more to grieve that the whale ships had been gaining upon the ship than to rejoice that the ship had so victoriously gained upon the Malays. But still driving on in the wake of the whales, at length they seemed abating their speed. Gradually the ship neared them, and the wind now dying away, word was passed to spring to the boats. But no sooner did they heard, by some presumed wonderful instinct of the sperm whale, became notified of the 3 keels that were after them, though as yet a mile in their rear, then they rallied again, and forming in close ranks and battalions so that all their spouts looked like flashing lines of stacked bayonets, moved on with redoubled velocity. How many more pages? Stripped to our shirts and drawers, we sprang to the white ash, and after several hours pulling, we were almost disposed to renounce the chase, when a general pause and commotion among the whales gave animated tokens they were now at last under the influence of that strange perplexity of inert irresolution, which, when the fishermen perceive it in the whale, they say he is gallied. The compact martial columns in which they had been hitherto rapidly and steadily swimming were now broken in one measureless rout, and like King Porus's elephants in the Indian battle with Alexander, they seemed going mad with consternation. In all directions, expanding in vast, irregular circles and aimlessly swimming hither and thither by their short, thick spoutings, they plainly betrayed the distraction of panic. This was still more strangely evinced by those of their number who, completely paralysed as it were, helplessly floated like waterlogged dismantled ships on the sea. Had these leviathans been but a flock of simple sheep, pursued over the pasture by 3 fierce wolves, they could not possibly have evinced such excessive dismay. But this occasional timidity is characterised of almost all herding creatures. Though banding together in tens of thousands, the lion-maned buffaloes of the West have fled before a solitary horseman. Witness to all human beings how, when herded together in the sheepfold of a theatre's pit, they will, at the slightest alarm of fire, rush helter-skelter for the outlets, crowding, trampling, jamming, and remorselessly dashing each other to death. Best, therefore, withhold any amazement at this strange gallied whales before us, for there is no folly of the beast of the earth which is not infinitely outdone by the madness of man. Though many of the whales, as has been said, were in violent motion, yet it is to be observed that as a whole the herd neither advanced nor retreated, but collectively remained in one place. As is customary in those cases, the boats at once separated, each making for some lone whale on the outskirts of the shoal. In about 3 minutes' time, Keekeg's harpoon was flung. The stricken fish darted blinding spray in our faces, and then running away with us like light, steered straight for the heart of the herd. Though such movement on the part of the whale struck under any circumstances, it is in no wise unprecedented, and indeed is almost always more or less anticipated. Yet does it present one of the more perilous vicissitudes of the fishery. For as the swift monster drives you deeper and deeper into the frantic shoal, you bid adieu to the circumspect life and only exist in a delirious throb. As blind and deaf, the whale plunged forward, as if by sheer power of speed to rid himself of the iron leech that had fastened to him. As we thus tore a white gash in the sea, on all sides menaced as we flew, by the crazed creatures to and fro rushing about us, our beset boat was like a ship mobbed by ice isles in a tempest, and striving to steer through their complicated channels and straits, knowing not at what moment it may be locked in and crushed. But not a bit daunted, Keekeg steered us manfully, now sheering off from this monster directly across our route in advance, now edging away from that whose colossal flukes were suspended overhead, while all the time Starbuck stood in his bows, lance at hand, pricking out of our way whatever whales he could reach by short darts, for there was no time to make long ones. Nor were the oarsmen quite idle, though their wonted duty was now altogether dispensed with. They chiefly attended to the shouting part of the business. "Out of the way, Commodore!" cried one to a great dromedary that of a sudden rose boldly to the surface. For an instant threatened to swamp us. "Hard down with your tail there!" cried a second to another, which, close to our gunwale, seemed calmly cooling itself in his own fan-like extremity. All whaleboats carry certain curious contrivances, originally invented by the Nantucket Indians, called drugs. 2 thick squares of wool of equal size were stoutly clenched together, so that they cross each other's grain at right angles. A line of considerable length is then attached to the middle of this block, and the other end of the line being looped, it can in a moment be fastened to a harpoon. It is chiefly among gallied whales that this drug is used, for then more whales are close round you than you could possibly chase at one time. But sperm whales are not every day encountered, while you may kill all you can. And if you cannot kill them all at once, you must wing them, so that they can be afterwards killed at your leisure. Hence it is that at times like these the drug comes into its requisition. Our boat was furnished with 3 of them. The first and second were successfully darted, and we saw whales staggeringly run off, fettered by the enormous sidelong resistance of the towing drug. They were camped like malefactors with this chain and ball, but upon flinging the third, in the act of tossing overboard the clumsy wooden block, it carried under one of the seats of the boat, and in an instant tore it out and carried it away, dropping the oarsman in the boat's bottom as the seat slid from under him. On both sides the sea came in at the wounded planks, but we stuffed 1 or 2 of the drawers and shirts in, and so stopped the leaks for the time. It had been next to impossible to dart these drugged harpoons, were it not that as we advanced into the herd, our whale's way greatly diminished. Moreover, that as we went still farther and farther from the circumference of commotion, the direful disorders seemed waning, so that when at last the jerking harpoon drew out, and the towing whale sideways vanished, then, with the tapering force of his parting momentum, we glided between 2 whales into the innermost heart of the shoal, as if some mountain torrent we had slid into a serene lake valley. Here the storms in the roaring glens between the outermost whales was heard, but not felt. In the central expanse the sea presented that smooth, satin-like surface called a sleek, produced by the subtle moisture thrown off by the whale in his more quiet moods. Yet Yes, we were now in that enchanted calm which they say lurks at the heart of every commotion. And still in the distracted distance we beheld the tumults of the outer concentric circles. We saw successive pods of whales, 8 or 10 in each, swiftly going round and round like multiplied spans of horses in a ring, and so circular shoulder to shoulder that a titanic circus rider might easily have overarched the middle ones, and so have gone round on their backs. Owing to the density of the crowd of reposing whales, more immediately surrounding the embayed axis of the herd, no possible chance of escape was at present afforded us. We must watch for a breach of the living wall that hemmed us in, the wall that had only admitted us in order to shut us up. Keeping at the centre of the lake, we were occasionally visited by small tame cows and calves, the women and children of this routed host. Now, yes, got some time for the rest of this. I think, now, inclusive of the occasional wide intervals between the revolving outer circles and inclusive of the spaces between the various pods in any one of these circles, the entire area at this juncture, embraced by the whole multitude, would have contained at least 2 or 3 square miles. At any rate, though indeed such a test at such a time might be deceptive, spoutings might be discovered from our low boat that seemed playing up almost from the rim of the horizon. I mention this circumstance now because if the cows and calves had been purposely locked up in this innermost fold, as if the wide extent of the herd had hitherto prevented them from learning the precise cause of its stopping, or possibly being so young, unsophisticated, and in every way innocent and inexperienced, however it might have been, these smaller whales, now and then visiting our becalmed boat from the margin of the lake, evinced a wondrous fearlessness and confidence, or else a still bit charmed panic, which it was impossible not to marvel at. Like household dogs, they came sniffing round us, right up to our gunwales, and touching them, till it almost seemed that some spell had suddenly domesticated them. Keekeg patted their forehead. Starbuck scratched their backs with his lance, but fearful of the consequences, for the time refrained from darting it. But far beneath this wondrous world upon the surface, another and still stranger world met our eyes as we gazed over the side, for suspended in those watery vaults floated the forms of the nursing mothers of the whales, and those by that enormous girth seemed shortly to become mothers. The lake, as I have hinted, was to a considerable depth exceedingly transparent, and as human infants, while suckling, will calmly and fixedly gaze away from the breast, as if leading 2 different lives at the same time, and yet, while drawing mortal nourishment, be still spiritually feasting upon some unearthly reminiscence. Even so did the young of the whales seem looking up towards us, but not at us, and as if we were but a bit of gulfweed in their newborn sight. Floating on their sides, the mothers also seemed quietly eyeing us. One of the little infants, that from certain queer tokens seemed hardly a day old, might have measured some 14 feet in length, and some 6 feet in girth. He was a little frisky, though as yet his body seemed scarce yet recovered from that irksome position it had so lately occupied in the maternal reticule, where, tail to head, and all ready for the final spring, the unborn whale bent like a Tartar's bow. The delicate side fins of the palms of his flukes still freshly retained the plaited, crumpled appearance of a baby's ears newly arrived from foreign parts. "Line! Line!" cried Keekeg, looking over the gunwale. Fast him! Fast him! Who line him? Who struck? 2 whale, 1 big, 1 little." "What ails ye, man?" cried Starbuck. "Look ye here," said Keekeg, pointing down. And when the stricken whale, that from the tub has reeled out the hundreds of fathoms of rope, as after deep sounding he floats up again and shows the slackened curling line buoyantly rising and spiralling towards the air, so now Starbuck saw long coils of the umbilical cord of Madame Leviathan, by which the young cub seemed still tethered to its dam. Not seldom in the rapid vicissitudes of the chase, this natural line with the maternal loose end becomes entangled with the hempen one, so that the cub is thereby trapped. Some of the subtlest secrets of the seas seemed divulged to us in this enchanted pod. We saw young Leviathan armours in the deep. And thus, though surrounded by circle upon circle of consternations and affrights, did these inscrutable creatures at the centre freely and fearlessly indulge in all peaceful concernments, yea, serenely revelled in the delight and in the dalliance and delight. But even so, amid the tornadoed Atlantic of my being, do I myself still forever centrally disport in mute calm, and while ponderous planets of unwaning woe revolve around me, deep down and deep inland, there I still bathe me in eternal mildness of joy. That's a good couple of sentences. Meanwhile, as we lay thus entranced, the occasional sudden frantic spectacles in the distance evinced the activity of the other boats, still engaged in drugging the whales on the frontier of the host, or possibly carrying on the war within the first circle, where abundance of room and some convenient retreats were afforded them. But the sight of the enraged, drugged whales now and then blindly darting to and fro across the circles was nothing to what at last met our eyes. It is sometimes the custom, when fast to a whale more than commonly powerful and alert, to seek to hamstring him, as it were, by sundering or maiming his gigantic tail tendon. It is done by darting a short-handled cutting spade, to which is attached a rope for hauling it back again. A whale wounded, as we afterward learned, in this part, but not effectually, it seemed had broken away from the boat, carrying along with him half of the harpoon line, and in the extraordinary agony of the wound, he was now dashing among the revolving circles like the lone-mounted desperado Arnold at the Battle of Saratoga, carrying dismay whenever he went. But agonizing as the wound was of this whale, and an appalling spectacle enough anyway, yet the peculiar horror with which he seemed to inspire the rest of the herd was owing to a cause which at first the intervening distance obscured from us. But at length we perceived that by one of the unimaginable accidents of the fishery, this whale had become entangled in the harpoon line that he towed. He had also run away from the cutting spade in him, and while the free end of the rope attached to that weapon had permanently caught in the coils of the harpoon line around his tail, the cutting spade itself had worked loose from his flesh, so that tormented to madness he was now churning through the water, violently flailing with his flexible tail and tossing the keen spade about him, wounding and murdering his own colleagues. Just a couple of pages now. This terrific object seemed to recall the whole herd from their stationary fright. First, the whales forming the margin of our lake began to crowd a little and tumble against each other as if lifted by half-spent billows from afar. Then the lake itself began faintly to heave and swell. The submarine bridal chambers and nurseries vanished in more and more contracting orbits. The whales in yet more central circles began to swim in thickening clusters. Yes, the long calm was departing. A low advancing hum was soon heard, and then, like to the tumultuous masses of block ice when the great river Hudson breaks up in spring, the entire host of whales came tumbling upon their inner centre, as if to pile themselves up in one common mountain. Instantly, Starbuck and Keekeg changed places, Starbuck taking the stern. "Oars! Oars!" he whispered, intensely whispered, seizing the helm. "Gripe your oars and clutch your souls now. My men, God, stand by. Shove him off, you Keekeg, the whale there. Prick him, hit him, stand up and stay so. Spring men, pull men, never mind their backs, scrape them, scrape away." The boat was now all but jammed between two vast black bulks, leaving a narrow Dardanelles between their long lengths. But by desperate endeavour we at last shot into a temporary opening, then giving way rapidly, and at the same time earnestly watching for another outlet. After many similar hairbreadth escapes, we at last swiftly glided into what had just been one of the outer circles, but now crossed by random whales all violently making for one centre. This lucky salvation was cheaply purchased by the loss of Keekeg's hat, who, while standing in the bows to prick the fugitive whales, had his hat taken clean from his head by the air eddy made by the sudden tossing of a pair of broad flukes close by. Riotous and disordered by the universal commotion now was, it soon resolved itself into what seemed a systematic movement, for having clumped together at last in one dense body, they then renewed their onward flight with augmented fleetness. Further pursuit was useless, but the boat still lingered in the wake to pick up what drugged whales might be dropped astern, and likewise to secure one which Flask had killed and waifed. The waif in a pennoned pole, two or three of which are carried by every boat, and which, when additional game is at hand, are inserted upright into the floating body of a dead whale, both to mark its place in the sea, and also as token of prior possession, should any of the boats of the other ship draw near. The result of this lowering was somewhat illustrative of that sagacious saying in the fishery, "The more whales, the less fish." Of all the drugged whales, only one was captured. The rest contrived to escape for the time, but only to be taken, as will hereafter be seen, by some craft other than the Pequod. That was quite a chapter, wasn't it? That was impressive. That was pretty dramatic. Yeah, so the fleet of huge circles of whales. Wow. That was pretty evolved. I love the imagery of the nursing mother whales and the calves all at the centre of this enormous typhoon of whales circling around and thrashing about, and the one boat darting into the middle and trying to harpoon a whale or two, surrounded by this tumult of whales. That's quite an image. But that'll do. That was a good chapter, I think. Half an hour's worth of reading. That was pretty good. Right, so thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to follow me wherever you're watching, whether it's Twitch or Twitter or Haps or YouTube. You can follow me, I think it'll say up there. I think it says up there from time to time, bio.link/A9630. Find me there on all the different things. And I'll see you next week, back in the Cloudhouse Cafe for the next chapter or two of Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Thank you for watching. See you next time, everybody. Cheerio, bye.